Chapter 13. A Cat in Hell's Chance. Stokes looked at Bernice and smiled. Then he looked at the Perfectons and screamed. He ran straight to Bernice and Wolsey and hid behind them. Most impressive, the Greater One gestured to the two humans and the cat. Now destroy them. Take care not to harm the lamp. No, shouted Bernice, grabbing Wolsey before he could throw himself between her and the alien guns. Cowards! Wolsey was shouting at them. Which of you will face me with a sword? The aliens aimed carefully. Menlove Stokes cleared his throat apologetically. What about going that way? What? Wolsey and Bernice looked in the direction he was gesturing. There was a hole in the side of a bush, only a few feet away. It had obviously been caused by a piece of the scenery landing there. Through the hole was the blackness and the glaring light sources of the theatre area. Bernice was certain that she hadn't been able to see it before Stokes had pointed it out. Those are all over the place, Stokes whispered. What are they? Escape routes, purred Wolsey. 1, 2... They leapt into the hole before he got to 3. Green beams flattened the bush into powder behind them. A moment of dislocation. Nothing. Bernice, Wolsey and Stokes appeared before the now empty rows of chairs that Bernice recognised from the last time she'd been amongst the audience. What the hell, she asked Stokes, are you doing here? Apart from saving our lives, for which many thanks. The artist swiftly filled them in on his experiences. And after I was zapped, I just wandered around in the Never for ages. I visited a sort of purple void, which I think was where toads go after they die, because there were just hundreds of them, and there was spawn everywhere. You should have heard the croaking. And I wandered around the edge of a singularity for a while, and saw all the people and things that were trapped there, their dreams flashing round and round like tracks on an ancient record. I talked to several of my ancestors, and spent an enjoyable few hours in a punt on the Serpentine in the early 1970s. I've come such a long way to be here. I have seen so much. Stokes smiled, a slow and astonished smile. And I can't wait to get home and paint it. But how did you find us? Asked Bernice. I seemed to be called here after a timeless time. Stokes looked around the theatre, as if it was as surprising as everything else he'd seen. I think it was that control box you've got on your finger. You mean this? Bernice indicated the ring. Yes, odd place to keep it. I found it in a vase that had always been beside my bed. A vase I transported there. These alien chaps can manipulate all time and space. But the coincidences, the accidents involved to bring that vase to me, for me to walk back into my own past when I walked out of this program, for that single planted object to bring you here. Bernice sat down, suddenly and heavily. Gods and goddesses, blessed be. Stokes shrugged. There was something about his half-smile, Bernice realised, that could never be fundamentally changed even by the most cosmic of experiences. Menlove Stokes knew who he was and was content, no matter what his bluster said, to be that. Unlike herself, who'd been dragged from emotional pillar to post by a panto. That's comedy for you, he said. There are no accidents, there's just a series of jokes. And most of them, I think you'll find, are on us. Menlove, remind me to get drunk with you when we get out of this, Bernice began. But just then the comedy caught up with them with a vengeance. From the stage behind them came a great cry. Aha! The Greater One and his minions were standing there, having followed them. Give us back our genie, called the alien leader, or face evaporation. Woolsey and Stokes pulled Bernice to her feet, and the three of them threw themselves between the seats as green energy beams splintered and charred the velvet. They ran along one of the rows, dodging and leaping as blasts flickered around them, but a new column of perfectons ran off stage left and stage right and encircled them. More and more of them were flooding into the theatre. "Split up!" Bernice called, and they ran in different directions, just as an energy bolt landed where they'd been. Bernice dodged the clutches of a perfecton, leapt over another's sprawling tackle, and threw the lamp to Woolsey, right over the head of another alien grabbing for it. Woolsey caught it, spun, kicked an alien aside, and sprinted down the central aisle, heading for a higher exit door. A row of perfectons leapt up from behind the rear seats, and he tottered backwards, trying desperately to reverse his steps. It was only because he fell over that the volley of neon green light missed his head. He rolled, hopped upright onto a seat back, and shouted, "Stokes! Catch!" "Hold on," the artist started to say, but it was too late. He intercepted the lamp in a long dive and thudded into the carpet, flat on his face. He grinned to see the thing intact in his hands, but his face fell as he looked up and saw a ring of perfectons surrounding him. "Now, don't do anything you'll regret later," he advised them. "I am a member of several important arts funding councils, and if any of you are even thinking of pursuing a career in the visual media, I can tell you this isn't going to do your case any good." During that puzzled interlude, Bernice had hauled herself over a seat back and ran at the aliens from behind. She broke through, and, remembering some smidgen of sporting skill from her days on the blood-soaked fields of the girls' games pitches at the academy, thumped the lamp as hard as she could with her foot. It spiraled into the air. Everybody looked up. Bernice used her momentum to grab Stokes and break free from the circle. Woolsey barged 3 perfectons aside, trod on several heads, and made a running catch. Bernice and Stokes joined him a moment later and continued to run with him, a column of shouting perfectons right behind them, the greater one at its head. The pursuit led right round the theatre, the perfectons on the other side too scared to fire at the fugitives for fear of hitting their comrades. Benny, Woolsey and Stokes kept throwing the lamp back and forth between them as they ran. On the third lap, Bernice panted, "This is all very well, but unless we get this sorted out, done and dusted, we, them, us, everybody will be killed in a very terrible and final way by an exploding sun. What are we going to do?" "Remember," panted Woolsey, "the magic words. That would help." "Magic words?" panted Stokes, looking puzzled. "To get us back to the castle," Benny explained, nearly fumbling her catch through exhaustion. "Typically, the lives of over 3 billion beings depend on me remembering a couple of words, and I've gone absolutely blank." "It's as simple as that," Stokes puffed. "Just open sesame and we get away." Bernice stopped suddenly and spun on her heel to face the panting mass of her oppressors. "I'm so sorry to put you to all this trouble," she told the bemused aliens. "I'll forget my head one of these days." She hooked her arms through those of the stunned Woolsey and Stokes. "Open sesame!" A cloud of scarlet smoke enveloped them. From the informative record of recent Grell history. The brave Grell master had released his dangerous prisoners, certain that his experienced servitors could easily deal with them should they offer resistance. He was watching one of them expertly working one of the alien control boxes, about which the Grell had learnt so much so quickly. An unforeseeable error had occurred. The producer of waste had evaded the control of the Grell control box. Note: producer of waste is a term used frequently in the Grell archives. There is much debate over whether it refers to artists in general or purely to Menlove Stokes. Observation: it is as if another control box is operating, the Grell master swiftly concluded. The subject has been lured off course. Use another. The servitors went to take another human to be fired into the green, but at that moment, calamity of calamities, disaster of disasters, one of those annoying coincidences, those natural happenings beyond control that unfairly beset the Grell whenever we seemed to have a chance of winning, occurred. The huge chamber shook and shuddered. This really is so, expletive, unfair. Note: this is the last entry recorded in this particular sequence. It seems the scribe gave up any attempt to create a heroic ending. Extract ends. Warrinder had been bracing his thick paw pads against the floor for minutes now, waiting for the first shock to strike the planet. When it did, he was the only creature not to be thrown off his feet. There were, he decided, some advantages to precognition after all. With a bound, he launched himself at the staggering Grell master, flexed his powerful hind limbs as he flew, and delivered a kick that sent the alien flying into the wall of the enclosure. Singh immediately leapt on the back of one of the Grell servitors and started wrestling with him. Wagstaff lashed about him with his walking stick from where he was lying on the floor, and Farouk tripped one of the Grell as it struggled to rise. Epstein dived for the gun and the control box, and kicked them away from a Grell as it lunged for them. They landed at Thu's feet. He picked them up, then looked up as a wave of thunder rolled across the chamber. "My world is dying," he whispered. Professor Owl opened her mouth in horror. "The outer layers of the sun are being sloughed off. The surface of the planet will be molten by now. We've got about half an hour before that star goes supernova and takes this entire solar system with it." The Grell master staggered to his feet and pointed at Thu. Warrinder was pleased to find his words were actually a surprise. "Query, can you help us? Do you know a way to survive?" Thu glared back at him and fired the gun. He swept around the room, fingers expertly playing with the sphere on the butt of the toy, faster than the human eye could follow, the green beams sucking up and searching out the Grell with extraordinary swiftness, until there were no Grell left at all. "Way to go!" Janes clapped his hands. "But won't that throw the Grell into the same boat as your people?" "No!" Thu gave a final twist on the sphere. "I have contained them elsewhere." "And are you going to save us all?" asked Lucinda. "I gather you do know a method of escape." "Sorry." Thu looked resigned, and Warrinder felt a terrible lump in his lower food pouch. "They seemed so bad, I just didn't want their company." "So," Epstein closed his eyes, grappling with the air in an effort to express the concept, "we are all going to die?" "Yes," the alien nodded. "But at least we can go to one of the observation domes and watch the sun explode. What do you think?" The scientists and humanities professors looked at each other with an unexpected unanimity. Epstein spoke for all of them. "I think that if I were to choose an ending for my own story, it would be something as spectacular and, considering we came here for a barbecue, something as ridiculous as that." The others all nodded. "Then let us go," said Thu. He nodded upwards. The ground they were standing on separated itself from the floor, took a quick spin over the walls of the enclosure, and then flew straight up to the ceiling. The dwarves had taken guard on the battlements, and, under Moody and Gushy's leadership, had persuaded Prince Charming's rather scared forces to at least run about and make a show of defence. The greater blasts of the genie had ceased, but a steady bombardment from the smaller weapons of the vast army of the audience continued. Candy had supervised the launching of a giant catapult. It was unfortunately filled with sweets, but she felt sure it would at least give the army below pause for thought. She'd already used a vast pair of her bloomers to create a hastily stitched army of her own, mannequins to make the battlements appear more heavily defended. Now she looked over the side of the castle and gasped. The audience had blown down a tree, taken it up between them, and were running at the gate. She wiped her brow, gathered the dwarves, and followed them at a run down into the palace. This was certainly the toughest audience she'd ever faced. The dwarves and the dame burst in on King Rupert as he was solemnly taking the A bonbon from its niche, the pantomime horse watching nervously. "We draw the line here," the king declared, "and we shall hope that history will remember the name Balsam. I intend to face the enemy, standing on my own bulwarks." "Good trick if you can do it," noted Candy. "It can't end this way," cried Cute. "Where's Bernice?" From higher up in the castle, there came yet another, new sort of explosion. It took Bernice a moment to realize where they'd appeared. The smoke of their materialization was so thick. Princess Aurora and her sister Marion were staggering and coughing near a window. They held bows in their hands. Through the door of what was apparently the master bedroom came rushing the dwarves, horse, king, prince, and dame. They were closely followed by the vizier, who grinned as widely as he could possibly grin when he saw that they held the lamp. Hello. You got it then?" Then his face fell. "Yeah, why'd you bring that lot with you?" "That lot?" "Behind you!" the assembled characters cried. Bernice turned round. Behind her stood the Greater One and a number of his warriors. They'd obviously been caught by the spell. The alien leader was tapping his foot. "Give me the lamp," he ordered. Bernice put the lamp between herself and the aliens. From downstairs there came a crash. Candy coughed in embarrassment. "I knew there was something I had to mention," she said. "There go the gates." Bernice turned slowly back to the Greater One and regarded him coolly. "I didn't have time to tell you our bad news earlier. Your sun's going to explode within the hour." The Greater One pursed his lips. "If you surrender the lamp, we will use the genie to create control surfaces and pilot this place into hyperspace. We will place you all in the green and may take you out in the future to be our slaves, if you're lucky." "What about if we use our computer program to stow you lot in the green?" Bernice glanced at the vizier, who suddenly blanched. The Greater One regarded the vizier with distaste. "That program has been rather messily inserted into this world. He is very limited in his function and could not do what you describe." Bernice considered that for a moment. The vizier obviously had something to do with the remaining mystery of this adventure, the matter of the anomalous caves and the convenient plot device of the lamp. But that wasn't important now. "I could rub the lamp and summon the genie, make it work for me." The Greater One remained confident. "And I would immediately use the control code to make it obey us once more." The sound of running feet came from the corridor. Before anybody could do anything, a squad of Perfectons ran in and covered Bernice's group from every angle. The new arrivals looked to the Greater One for guidance. He waved for them to wait. Bernice paused. She was aware of the alien weapons trained on them, aware of time running out, and aware that she couldn't think of any options other than the most awful one. She looked at Wolsey out of the corner of her eye. He was looking at the plinth, sitting unnoticed beside the bed. Their eyes met for a moment, and his glance carried a silent plea not to do it. There was something about his expression that reminded her of those evenings after Jason had left. The onset of night had always been the worst time, and her cat had seemed to sense that, climbing up onto her lap and kneading her until she responded and went to get him some milk or something. She'd felt like she still had love left because of Wolsey. It had been a delight to know him as a friend, as a person. How could she condemn him to that mindless sort of love again? The love of something that knew nothing but love, that didn't understand how complicated it all was. surprising me at the time, but, as Bernice was later to think, right on cue, a new voice spoke up. Cute had stepped forward into the aim of the guns. He looked quite scared. He looked at Bernice for a moment, his mouth open, as if he'd surprised himself. He cleared his throat. "I can't help but love," he said. "That's my character. I'm the littlest dwarf. I love beauty and intelligence and reason and bravery and all the other best things about women. Because I love like that, nobody really takes me seriously. I'm the one who just goes, 'She's beautiful,' all the time. I love Bernice here, for instance, because she's so big and at the same time so little. Because she finds the big in the little. Because she's so young." Young? Bernice had been blushing, wondering what this most embarrassing and blundering of dwarves was blundering into now. She looked around the assembled factions, aware that her high-pitched exclamation had attracted attention. "Sorry, go on," Cute continued. "Bernice says that a lot of us here are characters, quick sketches of real people. I'm sure I'm much more complicated, really. I'm sure that if you look at any quickly sketched character closely, you can see many more lines, enough for whatever person you might come looking for. But for now, while I'm this adorable character, you," he nodded to the greater one, "can be absolutely certain you can trust me. If you go back into the audience and let us avoid what terrible thing we need to avoid, then I promise that we'll let you all out again when we've escaped. I give you my word. And you know that you can trust the word of the littlest dwarf." Bernice looked at the greater one. For a moment, it seemed that he might actually accept that. Then he started to laugh. "Why, this is pure comedy. You expect the greater one to obey the wishes of one as small as you?" He gestured to his men. "On the count of 5, kill them all. Try not to damage the lamp." Bernice looked again at Wolsey. In the corner of his eye there was the glint of a tear. The aliens all around them started to aim to the greater one's count. In the distance of the dying land outside, a bell began to toll. Everybody looked at Bernice to save them. Her fingers tightened on the lamp. The count and the bell came to 1. Wolsey's eyes met hers again. 5 o'clock, he sighed, and still no sign of Dick. And then he roared. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Wolsey became a bristling ball of fur, fangs gleaming, flying in a great leap straight at the greater one. His sword had swung free of its scabbard. Menlove Stokes threw himself at Cute, waving his arms like a windmill target, trying to attract the lightning to himself rather than the dwarf. Bernice leapt at the pillar. She landed beside it, the first flickers of green neon impacting and bursting the wall just past her head. She looked quickly over her shoulder and saw Wolsey's sword and arm incinerated in hundreds of skittering bursts of light. She thought of love, and of how vulnerable and precious and funny it was. And then she reached up and slammed the lamp down onto the top of the pillar. A knot of space-time stood in orbit above the world. It was an electromagnetic blank. Light fell into its labyrinth, rushed around it, and was filtered out the other side, unchanged on its original course. Inside the knot were melded the Winton, the world and culture of the Perfectons, and the complex intellectual matrix of English pantomime. The knot was in turbulence, straining against itself. One moment it was whole, and then, like a small universe in creation, it was exploding. Above the planet, the Winton folded itself back into existence. A moment of dislocation. Nothing. Bernice was lying face down on the floor, she realized. A new floor, the floor of the flight deck of the Winton. The whole deck was suffused with red light that shone through the vision ports. She poked her nose up a fraction. She was spread-eagled across the doorway between the deck and the navigation bubble that led off from it. The missile had penetrated the wall here, as well as in the fantasy world. Only here the effect wasn't nearly so dramatic. The nose cone of the missile protruded from the computer banks and was covered with the airtight white ceramic gel of the anti-meteor sprays. Scattered around Bernice were the 7 members of her tutorial group, the ship's captain and 3 of his officers, Professor Candy, Menlove Stokes, and the 2 mysterious agents of the people. "Woolsey," said Bernice. "Where's Woolsey?" "He's here." Professor Candy had clambered to his feet near the navigation computers. Bernice scrambled across the floor, grabbing a medical pack as she went, and landed beside the cat. He was lying in a fetal position, curled around the blackened stub of his right front leg. He was mewling high and hard. Bernice sprayed the leg with antiseptic bandage foam, thumbing the anaesthetic button frantically until Woolsey slept. "Don't die," she whispered. Aurum Sylvestra had scrambled back to her navigation position. She had just finished tapping a complicated data sequence into her lectern. Now she let out a little shriek. "The star!" she cried. "It's going to blow! We've got less than 10 minutes!" Bernice, carrying Woolsey in her arms, stumbled to one of the vision ports. The whole of the sky was filled by a red mist, at the heart of which lay a nub of brilliance. That star-like point was flickering rapidly as material fell into it, growing visibly brighter by the moment. Captain Balsam started to hit controls frantically. "Ready the hyperdrive!" Stokes looked back and forth at the chaos around him, uncomprehendingly. "But my friends," he shouted, "the other academics, they're still on the planet!" "If so," the lieutenant formerly known as Prince Charming muttered, "then they're history." "But they weren't on the surface," Stokes insisted. "They could have—" The woman that Bernice knew as Princess Marion called from her position. "We're getting a distress call from the planet's surface." Balsam swung to look at Bernice. "We can't mount an evacuation," he insisted. "There just isn't time." Bernice bit her lip and looked down at Woolsey dreaming in her arms. Thu stood in the translucent green dome on the molten surface of his planet and watched the surface slide by under the red sky. The alien academics stood with him. They gazed at the dying sun overhead, and they shivered and cried and still couldn't stop talking. Professor Wagstaff turned to Professor Blandish. "If, as seems likely, time is about to shut up the book of all our days—" "A misquote," noted Blandish. "I wasn't aware that it was a quotation at all," sighed Wagstaff. "Raleigh, surely, or is it Drake?" "Drake? Why would I be quoting Drake? We're about to be reduced to atoms, not fight the dratted For a moment, Thu thought that the stress had been too much for the old man's frail body, that he was having some sort of seizure. Then he realized that he was sobbing. Blandish awkwardly stepped forward and put his arms around his colleague. "You did not lose that book that you borrowed from my library. I found it again, and didn't tell you." "You should have had my office," cried Wagstaff. "It's all right," said Blandish. "I preferred mine, in the end." Hetty and Lucinda turned away from the 2 sobbing history professors. "I hope we shall have none of that," said Hetty. "Indeed," said Lucinda. "Suffice it to say that I have found our unusual situation, and it is certainly unusual, to be not without interest. As have I." The dear ladies nodded to each other, and then, as one, reached into their purses, and each extracted from them a miniature of some liquor. They threw them back together. "Cheers!" Singh had put down the communication device that he'd been uselessly yelling into, and had started to pace in small circles around Warrender. "It's never been anything personal," he assured the packer. "I hope you understand that." "Yes," said Warrender. It's just that I've always been uncomfortable with the nature of your academic or quasi-academic discipline. Yes. And as a consequence, Singh suddenly stopped and looked at the curl of the Pacha's nose. You know something, don't you? Something that's going to happen. Yes, the Pacha nodded. It's starting, whispered Professor Owl. She was looking up at a spot of brighter light that had formed on the edge of the stellar mass that was compacting above them. The spot grew and grew. That will be one of the initial flares, Owl noted. It'll vaporize the planet. Thu was astonished that, at that moment, the professor began to laugh. Why? He began. If I'd been asked to choose a way to go, Owl chuckled, this would be it. It's all quite fascinating. Singh's mouth fell open. He took one slow step forward. My friend, I think you are going to be disappointed. That isn't a solar flare. Owl screwed up her eyes. Oh, yes, it is. Epstein clapped his hands together and leapt into the air. Oh, no, it isn't. The academics all started to cheer. Thu changed the shape of his eyes to better see what they were seeing, and felt pain, because suddenly he had hope. For powering towards them through the red sky, trailing vapour from every surface, was the stubby shape of the Winton. Singh's communicator crackled into life. Bingo, what's it, or whatever you're supposed to say. Professor Summerfield to all other professors. I'm told that we're going to get one go at this, so listen carefully. Bernice was curled up in a corner under the communications desk, Woolsey in her lap. She held a microphone close to her lips to muffle the sound of the stresses that were tearing at the outside. Most of the planet's atmosphere has been boiled away, which is good news, because we don't have time to bother with the jolly boats. We're going to make a low pass over the surface and open the cargo bay doors. She glanced at Stokes. I'm told you've got all sorts of alien magic stuff going on down there. Can you fly? Thu grabbed Singh's communicator. We're flying now. The academics looked down. They were. The hemispherical green dome swept straight past the ruddy golden shape of the Winton as it tore through the thin and swirling vapour of the planet's upper atmosphere. It spun to a halt right behind the craft, then whizzed straight through the open doors of the cargo bay. They closed behind it. Bernice felt Woolsey's breathing against her chin. They were all going to make it. Every single one of them. As she thought that, the shadows across the cabin instantly lengthened, and everything was silhouetted. The colour of the sky outside changed from red to white, which meant that the star had exploded. The expanding sphere of the supernova swept past the planet, then swept through it. The body of the world that had cradled a civilization became a lengthening stream of plasma. The little golden shape of the Winton sped out of the solar system with a wall of fire racing just behind it, planet being vaporized in its trail. The fire blossomed into great flares that reached out for the spaceship, fingers of fire that pursued the craft right up to the edge of near light speed. Inside the juddering craft, Bernice reached out her hand. Her fingers closed, by accident, on those of Michael Doran. But there are no accidents, she thought, as she stared seriously at him, and he stared seriously back. There's only narrative. The flares swept around the Winton, just as it impossibly passed light speed and vanished from the universe, and was free.